Thank you. All right, hopefully this mic is working. And I can present slides. Yasena's got the menu in Dutch, so I'm like, what's... There we go. Okay. Thank you very much. So we decided to mix it up a little bit after lunch, and I hope everyone's well caffeinated because we would like this to be an interactive session, an interactive discussion. What we're going to do is we're going to start off with 4 short talks, sort of opening statements from different stakeholders around these sorts of questions. Where do learning, analytics, and efficacy meet? So it was nice to hear Adam's talk right before this. And then personally in your organization, where you're coming from, what are the challenges that you face when trying to measure efficacy? And we've tried to assemble a group with a lot of different perspectives. So first we're going to hear from Jeremy Roschelle from Digital Promise, a nonprofit. And we're going to hear from Kelli and Kodi from Khan Academy. I'm going to talk a little bit about research in a public company, Rosetta Stone. And then we're finally going to hear from Denis Newman, who is the CEO of a boutique consulting firm that works on K through 12 efficacy. After we hear our little talks, we're going to have a little bit of group discussion, and then we're going to turn it into a kind of panel discussion, group discussion. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Jeremy for the first talk.
You're going to find my slides too?
Yes. Okay.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Roschelle from Digital Promise, and boy, everyone's talking about how great their place is to work, and Digital Promise is a great place to work. So be checking our job board too. I'm going to do a little past, present, future organization of my 6 or 7 minutes. And so there I am, Digital Promise. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, great. So I've done 4 large-scale efficacy trials, all in mathematics in the past. Ooh, the font is coming out really strange. But one was online math homework increases achievement. Another one was about integrating visual representations with professional development. And so I have a lot of experience doing these things. And I just wanted to share something about that experience to start off, and then I'll talk about what I'm doing now and what I wish I was doing in the future. So based on those 4 studies, here's the cons I see for doing these big trials like the ones I had experiencing. They're extremely expensive. Those 4 trials were considerably north of $10 million to do all 4. They're incredibly slow. You start on them, you propose them, you get the money, 4 years at least till you get a result. And we were talking at lunch, in those 4 years, the product that you were looking at has completely changed. So what was that worth? I find them extremely tedious, to be honest. There's a lot of logistics in recruiting, maintaining control, collecting data. It's an incredibly intense amount of logistics to get all the data in. And at the end of the day, Bob and I have a paper, I don't know where Bob went, but these are hard to publish. The reviewers are really tough on these things. And so it's not that fun. Sorry, not that fun. Why might it be worth it? Well, I mean, they are hard to do, so you get a lot of recognition when you've done one, which is kind of cool. I do think that the discipline of doing an efficacy trial can make you think much more clearly, because you're going to do something once, you're going to do it at scale, and you're betting a lot on it. That makes you think really hard about what it is that could work. And sometimes I think that's really good. I think Denis would agree with me on this next point. They're especially good when you do more than look at did it work or not, but you use this as an opportunity to look at how implementation varied, how outcomes varied, and what you might learn about variation in conditions across settings and in, for example, teaching practices and implementation. And because the products often change, I don't think it's worth going through 4 years to say this product is great because it's going to be changed in the 4-year time. But if there's an underlying theory or approach that's in widespread use at stake, that can really be worth it. So maybe they're worth it. Also, I found that the influence on school decisions is actually quite weak. And I'll give you an example. The first one I showed is online math homework increases achievement. We did that in the state of Maine, and the team got a replication study funded to go do the exact same thing in North Carolina. So if these had a strong influence on school decisions, it should have been super easy to recruit in North Carolina because we had gold standard results in our hands. It wasn't easy. It was horrible to recruit. And so they just aren't that influential in getting school leaders to want to buy your thing. And then there's other things here. But I've also wondered a lot, but like, what are we after in improving schools? Is it really finding the intervention that is a one-shot pill is going to improve things? Or is the game continuous improvement? So to stay on time, I'm just going to keep going. Here's what I'm doing at Digital Promise. I have a new job. I'm not really leading these kind of big, expensive efficacy trials anymore. I am doing a lot of researcher practitioner partnerships aimed at improving things with schools. And I am finding the RCTs are useful to me, but in a different way, which is I'm paying a lot of attention to meta-analyses. And so I put up there, this is on LinkedIn, some of the meta-analyses that in 2018 I found super useful to me. And so one thing about a meta-analysis is it takes lots of studies on a similar phenomena across all different kinds of settings, and you get kind of what are the main drivers jumping out of that. And I've found those to be super helpful. Oh, the context we work in Digital Promise is often our League of Innovative Schools. So we have this really cool ability that we have about 100 districts we have a relationship with and that are part of Digital Promise for 6, 7, 8 years. And so we're contextualizing our work in those relationships. So that's really cool. Okay, what I wish I was doing, and then I'll wrap up there. These are the things I care about. I care about things that could scale, that could have an impact, and that have a positive influence on equity. Those are the things I wish I was helping produce for the world. What I notice in talking, for example, to the League of Innovative Schools is they're not usually making a decision about one technology. Rather, they have 200, 300, 400 technologies floating around. And what I'd really like to be able to help them with, of all these things floating around in your district, which ones are getting a lot of use? Which of these have high potential? Which are generating lots of data? And how could we partner with you? I'm going to be done faster than that. How could we partner with you to take this collection of things you've got, and you're a school superintendent or a school chief academic officer, you can't pay attention to those 200 products floating around. How can you choose a focus for improvement where you can really use all these things much better? And so that's what I'm trying to figure out and would love to talk to people about, is how can we drive improvement in the actual setting schools find themselves in, which isn't just picking one thing. It's making sense of this ecology that's taking place. And also driving down costs and having more fun. Okay, thanks.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelli Millwood Hill, and this is Kodi Weatherholtz, and we're from Khan Academy. So for those of you who don't know, Khan Academy is a nonprofit with a bold mission to provide a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. We have 70 million registered users, which equates to about 18 million learners per month, and that spans across 190 countries. We're translated into about 30 different languages. So I'm going to give you a quick walk down memory lane of Khan Academy for those of you who have heard of us. We've been around since, wow, that image came up awful. We've been around since 2007, and that's what Khan Academy used to look like. It was like this page of just like lots of links to lots of different videos. It was this massive video library put together by Sal Khan. But my focus is on efficacy, so I'm not going to talk that much about the product. From between 2007 and 2017, there were lots of third-party independent studies done on Khan Academy, of which Khan Academy had no participation in those studies. They were independent researchers doing it. They weren't commissioned by Khan Academy or anything like that. So we were the beneficiary of learning from some of those studies, but as Jeremy mentioned, often was the case by the time those studies came out or got into our hands, we're like, that's not even our product anymore. It's totally changed. So then in July of 2017, with my hire, started a new efficacy and research function at Khan Academy, because we wanted to do our own efficacy research for two purposes. One, and primarily where we are right now, is for product improvement. We want to hold ourselves accountable to make sure that learners are learning something with our product, and if they're not, we need to do better and make our content more accessible, or do whatever we need to do to make sure that learning is occurring on Khan Academy. And then, that's the internal improvement. And then, of course, we want to share with the world, the difference that we are making, those efficacy results. So we ramped up quick. In 2017, July 2017, I started. Kodi came on board in November. And so we hit the ground running with Back to School 2017 and started to lay the foundation and partnered with two large school districts on research pilots. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those later. And now for this school year, we're really picking up steam. For the 2018-19 school year, we have 9 research partnerships, so we've definitely scaled up. We also have 1 more headcount, so now we're a massive team of 3 doing this. And here's just so Khan Academy, like I said before, we were like a video library of just loads of videos, mostly in math, in 2007. Now in 2019, we still have lots of videos, but we also have practice exercises, we have articles, we're across subject areas, we're across grade levels, and as of this past July, there's also Khan Academy Kids, which is a free app for kids ages 2 through 5 for early childhood learners. So we're expanding in all ways. So now I want to talk about a little bit of our experience, and we're a new function at Khan Academy, and what it's been like to try to do efficacy research with this product. So what we wanted to understand is we want to know, how does use and performance on Khan Academy relate to performance on state assessments? Right, we can do our own analyses to understand how mastery on Khan Academy, students' learning progressions and all of that, but what we really want to know is, how does that learning transfer into high-stakes assessments? That's what schools and districts care about. And so it's been a long and winding road to get there. This is not easy work, and so we want to share our lessons learned. So step 1, partner with a district, right? And not any old district will do, because there's lots of prerequisites that need to be in place with a district. Khan Academy's online, so they need to have an appropriate infrastructure. There needs to be devices for students. All of those logistics need to be in place. Additionally, we want to make sure we're a free product, so we need to make sure that the district has skin in the game, in that they have an implementation plan, that they have really well thought out how Khan Academy is going to be used, because it's not worth our effort to go in and train tons of teachers, at no cost, to then find out that no one's actually using this. So we want to make sure that the product is going to be used. So a key area that we look for in a district is their eagerness to actually partner with us to do efficacy research. And if they happen to have a research division in the district, that's just kind of a bonus on our end. So once we get that partnership with the district, the next up is limitations in study design. So there are really practical constraints that we have to deal with. One, a school district, they're going to adopt Khan Academy, and they're going to come up with their implementation plan. If I want to do a study on the efficacy of AP World History, oh my gosh, really? Okay, that's not going to happen if the school is focused entirely on math implementation, for example. We're constrained by what the district is focused on. We aim for correlational studies. A quasi-experimental design is a bonus if we can get that data sharing agreement. RCTs are impractical because the penetration rate of Khan Academy is so high that we find our control groups are just completely contaminated. Agreements, you have to get lots of documents into place: partnership agreement, data sharing agreement, research approvals, external IRBs. Data sharing agreements alone, on the short end, have taken us 3 months. Some of them from the summer, we still haven't signed yet, 9 months later. So lots of time for that. You also need to make sure there's a plan in place to train teachers and provide them ongoing professional development and support, so you can make sure that the implementation is a success. And then you're finally ready to launch a study, and then you get the fun of the data that comes back.
So briefly, I'll just talk about 3 categories of data challenges. And one is student privacy and ethics. So as Kelli mentioned, we're a nonprofit, and our mission is to provide a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And that anyone, anywhere part is really critical, because ideally we want to be serving all learners, especially underprivileged learners who might not have access otherwise. So at the same time, so that kind of requires a world in which we can disaggregate findings by particular groups of interest. At the same time, education can be dangerous. In certain parts of the world, attempting to educate yourself is criminal, and that kind of leads into a scenario where we actually have a very strict privacy policy, and we don't log a lot of information about who our users are in terms of their location, about their demographics. Imagine a world where we get hacked. We just don't want data out there that could in any way be used adversarially against our students. So we take great pains to protect student data. Another side of the data challenges is merging disparate data sources, and no single stakeholder in education has all of the data pieces that you need to do efficacy research. And that plays out kind of at multiple levels. Even just within Khan Academy, our log data, we're talking about somewhere on the order of about a terabyte a day of log data, and that data lives in different places, some of which may communicate with each other more or less easily. So there's the kind of internal wrangling of getting the learner usage behavior, the student profiling, kind of working with all the databases to get those data wrangled just internally. And then as Kelly said, really what we care about is then linking that up with achievement data to look at the relationship between our usage and then high stakes outcomes. And so then we have to partner with a district to get the achievement data, pull in demographics, but then even the linking between our data and theirs requires identifiers that are, there's an additional degree of wrangling there, and then pulling in other data sources around classroom and teacher observations for implementation fidelity, student and teacher surveys around perceptions and attitudes. You're also dealing with a lot of data sparsity where the usage data, you have it for everyone who's using. For classroom observations and student surveys, you only get the people who, you don't necessarily have full representation. So in the merging process, you get data sparsity. And then, as we talked about, rapid product evolution. Even on the scale of month to month, there can be differences in the product experience, in the underlying instrumentation, which then influences our ability to do things like learner and teacher profiling. And we'll leave it there.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So I will start off by saying that, first of all, I agree with everything that everyone has said. Every single challenge that all of you brought up, we have as well. But I want to back it up a little bit and talk about some things that I've been wrestling with at Rosetta Stone. So my title is Head of Academic Research. We have a very similar setup to you all. We have a small team that does internal research for product development. We also partner with external clients to do research in school districts, at universities, and so forth. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. The first thing I should say about efficacy research in a corporate context is that I need to say that I'm speaking for myself only, and I'm not here officially representing Rosetta Stone. Okay, so the questions that I want to talk about with my remaining 5 minutes are, what is efficacy, and who should measure efficacy? So efficacy seems like a very obvious thing. Everyone should know what we're talking about, right? So you've got the ability to produce the result that you want. Are you moving the needle? Is your product or your service or your intervention doing what you intend it to do? However, turns out that's not the case. For one thing, there's a difference between efficacy and effectiveness. So in medical trials, efficacy is in an ideal world and effectiveness is in a real world sort of program evaluation. I don't usually see that distinction made in ed tech, so we all say efficacy, 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 but sometimes we're conflating those two things. Another issue that I've run into a lot is efficacy and what it means depends on who you're talking to. So let me give you some examples. At Rosetta Stone, we sell software to universities and colleges. We sell to business corporations, global multinational corporations who need their employees to learn a language to improve their business skills. We sell to K through 12, so English language learners, for example, in the U.S., kids who are learning French, kids who are learning Spanish. We sell in the U.S., we sell overseas, and we sell to consumers. So this last guy is, he's got his smartphone, he's riding on the train, he needs to pick up some Italian before he goes on his vacation. We have all of these different clients, and all of them come to me or come to the company and say, efficacy, give me efficacy. And they mean very different things. So I need to come up with a schema for what sort of efficacy each of these characters is asking for. So universities may ask if the product is aligned with standard recognized learning principles. Does it help when it's added to an existing classroom as a blended learning solution? Corporations may ask if the product can help their learners communicate in a business context. Often, what is the ROI? Or distressingly, what is the ROE, return on education? K through 12 want to know whether the product will improve state test scores and whether it meets U.S. government standards to allow them to use a certain pot of money to purchase the product. And consumers want to know, is it better than this other product? Is it faster than this other product? The only place where we have really good definitions for what people mean when they say efficacy is K through 12 education, and Denis is going to talk about this a little bit more. So the Every Student Succeeds Act has these 4 levels of efficacy, standards of evidence: strong, moderate, promising, and a rationale. And those are based completely on the research design that you use. So a true experiment, or RCT, randomized control trial, would be strong. Quasi-experimental, like the Khan Academy folks were talking about, would be moderate. Correlational without adequate correction, like propensity score or something like that, would be promising. And then rationale just means you think it's going to work and you're working on trying to get some evidence. As we know, as you go further and further up this type of evidence, the time increases, the expense increases, your control decreases, and the strength of evidence decreases, and your product changes 25 times during the trial. All right, I only have about 2 minutes, so I'm going to finish up, or 1 minute, with 2 minutes, with who should measure efficacy. And this is something I've been struggling with. So my background is in academia. This is my first job in a corporation. How do I maintain my integrity as a researcher while working for a for-profit corporation who has a vested interest in showing that the products work or that the products are better than some other products? And I've approached this in a number of different ways. So as Khan Academy, we do our own internal research primarily for product development. And then we try to partner with clients when we're going to do something that we want to publish, for example, in a peer-reviewed journal. And I just want to give you a quick example. We did 2 studies last year on the use of Rosetta Stone for K through 12 English language learners in the United States. We wanted to see whether using the software would help them improve their English skills as opposed to the status quo curriculum. And what we did for that is my team designed the study. We hired people from the school district to administer the pre and post tests so that we didn't do it. We used a third-party test from Pearson so that it wasn't our test. And then we contracted with my colleagues where I used to work at the University of Maryland Center for Advanced Study of Language, and I paid them and I said, your job is to keep me honest. You're going to analyze the data, you're going to come up with the data analysis plan, and you're going to interpret the data so that I don't touch it. I can't even unconsciously put my thumb on the scale. That's important to me personally because I want what we do to be honest and I want it to be reliable, but that doesn't mean that anyone else knows that we did that, right? So we have to be very careful about how we communicate because there's always this assumption that if the company is doing the research, even a little bit, that it's probably not trustworthy. So I struggle with that a lot. And I put Empirical Education and Digital Promise on here because that's another option, is to partner with a nonprofit or a consulting firm and have them do such a study. But we don't have $10 million to spend. Well, no one has given me $10 million to give to Jeremy. So right now, that sort of thing is not an option. So we're sort of trying to balance. Some things for future discussion later. How do we think about credibility? How do we think about who funds the research and how we are transparent about that? What does it mean if a company controls the results or the distribution of the results? And what sort of measurement do we use? Do we always use third-party measurements, or how much can we use our own internal learning analytics before it becomes less trustworthy? Okay, I will stop. and turn it over to Denis for the next section.
There it is. Okay. And so I'm picking up on the question that was raised about where does efficacy and analytics meet, and my answer is research design, something that Empirical Education has been working on for quite a few years. And I think I just pushed this button. No, how do you? The right arrow. Yeah. So Empirical Education is a 16-year-old, as you heard, is a boutique research firm based here in Palo Alto. We are not currently hiring, but just watch because we're growing. And we're now incubating a new company, Evidently Incorporated, that is specializing in efficacy analytics for EdTech products. And as Anita said, Every Student Succeeds Act has actually given definitions for what's an acceptable research design. I don't entirely agree with it, but it is and the first two, the Tier 1 and Tier 2, are experimental. That is, they're ones where there's a control group. The promising evidence means it's a correlational analysis. You have two variables, and they're related to each other. And if it's positive, you know that it's at least consistent with a impact result. And the bottom, the Tier 4 is really the basis for the research design. And I'm going to give you a little case study that illustrates the design. And the example I'm going to use is the Dynamic Learning Project, which is a collaboration with Digital Promise. I think Masa is here from Digital Promise, and Val Lazarev, my colleague from Empirical. It's in the design phase right now. We are designing a rapid cycle evaluation that combines Tier 2 and Tier 3. And I kind of want to show you how that works as an example of how we take the basic level of a logic model and illustrate a research design. So this is a kind of a schematic, and my colleagues had all complained that this is way too simple. But let's take a professional development program. It changes how the teacher thinks about the classroom. It changes classroom practices. That gives the students a different experience, and then the students do better on some test at the end of the year, for example. And most experiments that are done go from the professional development to measuring the final outcome. And what we're illustrating here is this middle level where you're really explaining, you're able to explain what the result is, but it's not trivial how that actually works with the levels. And so in this is just putting it into the words of the DLP. There's a coaching. It changes the attitudes of the teachers, and that changes the patterns of EdTech usage, and let's say it increases EdTech. Just to be really simple about it, it makes more EdTech usage, which causes more improved test scores. And so you have this kind of chain of causation that you kind of theorize is flowing through this thing. But the causation is not totally straightforward. Because we have a comparison group, there's the DLP coaching, the people who got the coaching to the level that was expected by the DLP project, compared to teachers who didn't have any coaching. we can see that that causes attitude changes and patterns of ed tech usage. We also, by the way, as an experimental result, that is a tier 2 result, can see that the coaching, let's say we don't know yet because we're still in the design phase, so it could be that it doesn't do anything at all. But let's say it goes there. And we can see that the result is that the students in the teachers' classes who were coached had higher test scores than those who were not. Now, the other two, the attitude changes, let's say there's a better attitude and it leads to more usage. And by the way, a lot of, and 2 minutes to go, yeah, okay. And more usage and more usage is correlated with these test scores. And so you have sort of a combination in the design here that means that it's a correlational a result or a correlational conclusion that the DLP coaching was mediated by these changes in the classroom and resulted in the outcome. Now, I wanted to say that there's a lot of places where the ESSA misses the mark, and one thing is that it follows what we call the one big experiment idea. That is, you get one big experiment, you pay $10 million, and that's all you ever need to do. And you have that proof, and ESSA doesn't say, well, yeah, it was 8 years ago. They just say, do you have it or not? And what we found is that we've almost never found a product that has the same effect for all kinds of kids. And so, and that's not something. And one study is seldom enough to differentiate subgroups just from a statistical point of view. And ESSA doesn't call for subgroup analysis, nor requires multiple studies of the sort that Jeremy would do a meta-analysis on. So let me just give a final thought here, which is that the school district leaders are looking for something that's going to work with their kids and their teachers. They don't care whether it worked on average in some $10 million RCT. They care whether it's going to work with their kids, and just because you see a study that is a tier 1 or tier 2 doesn't mean that it's going to be useful. And so you have to understand that unlike climate change, for example, research design is not a settled science, and in fact ESSA levels is not the final word on research design. It's an area that we really need to work on and continue to kind of work through.
All right, thank you. So we're going to shift now into a little bit of group discussion and Q&A. If the other speakers will come up and sit in these chairs. While they're doing that, I'd like everyone out there to kind of wake up, move around, talk. So I've put some discussion questions on the board. I'd like you to get with your neighbor for maybe 2 or 3 minutes and talk about one of these questions that you think is the most interesting to you, or something that you heard from the short talks that we gave that you agree with, disagree with, would like to talk about in the Q&A session. And we'll talk for a couple of minutes amongst ourselves, and then hopefully some questions will come out of that, and it'll turn into more of a give and take type of discussion. I thought it was just me, like I was nervous and funny, but I'm not so nervous. I'm like, I'm just gonna get my sweater off.
I never even like thought about that. Yeah.
Let's have a 1-minute warning to wrap up your conversations in the next minute, and then we'll move to group discussion. All right, everybody, let's get started. All right, how did those conversations go? Good? Anybody have anything they want to bring up? Okay.
Thanks. So we were just discussing, I was thinking about what the difference is when it comes to industry between engagement and efficacy. And you think about app companies, and they're all about engagement because that means you're coming back to the app, you're getting views, etc. In education, you don't tend to display ads, so it's not quite as much of a focus, right, as it is in those other apps. But I also imagine it must be tempting to think about maximizing engagement instead of some other efficacy or learning measure, right? MOOCs, when they started, is all about putting butts in the seats, right? And that's, that's engagement. That's not efficacy, but it's engagement. You can report higher and higher numbers of enrollments. That gets more and more people interested. And then in terms of, your funders, they may be asking, are you increasing the number of users you have by 10%, by 20%, 2 times, That's what they want. They want more engagement. So how do you kind of work with those two issues, efficacy versus engagement, and not be just tempted by engagement?
Mm-hmm. We see it as an and. I don't see it as an or. I'm mic'd, right? Yeah. So certainly when we first started, you're saying engagement, but I see that I think you're defining it as like time on site, time on task, usage is how we would look at it. So usage was our core metric for a while, and that's what our funders cared about and our donors wanted to see, like, are people using this thing? We've since evolved. Now we're like, yeah, we track that. That's relatively easy to track in comparison to actual learning data. But now we're moving more in the direction, now also our donors are more interested in, like, great, we know lots of people are using this, but what are they learning from it? Now that's what they're caring about. So I don't know if others have experienced that kind of evolution, but that's definitely where we are, and we're switching, adjusting our KPIs to focus more on learning.
Well, we definitely would consider the engagement to be a mediator and something that happens in the classroom, and we actually find a lot of the ed tech companies are focused on that when they want to have a measure of it, and so we're interested. There isn't a good measure of engagement other than the usage data, which is actually works pretty well, and that was kind of the picture that we drew here, is that the kids would be using it more, and you can actually see which kids used it more and what kind of patterns of usage and which kinds of patterns of usage were associated with better test scores. And so it's not just a matter of getting engagement. You want to know that you could put Pokemon Go in the classroom and everybody uses it and they're all excited and they don't learn any math. And so it's going to be really important also to take that step and look to see whether, it's being used a lot, but is it making a difference?
And one more comment on that. I think to your point about butts and seats, the notion of a leading indicator, I think, is perhaps helpful here, especially if you have organic growth. Then if you're getting a lot of organic growth, then that engagement isn't necessarily efficacy, but it is perhaps a leading indicator of something is working at some level. It's getting people to come back over and over again organically, and so perhaps you're onto something, even if it's not definitive proof.
At Rosetta Stone, we call both of these out explicitly as part of our learning model, and we try to make sure that we call each other out on that. It's a little bit of a tension. So the software developers are very much about engagement, and the business people are very much about, downloads and so forth. But at the same time, we are very interested in effectiveness. So we try to balance them as much as possible with the understanding that if no one's engaged with the product, they're not going to be learning. Especially for language learning, it's a long, drawn-out process. You have to keep coming back and back and back. If you don't come back, you're not going to learn. So, trying to balance those things is always something that we struggle with.
I have a sort of a cynical question. How do you, for the for-profit company Rosetta Stone and non-profit, justify the cost of doing efficacy? Because one argument, being very cynical is, you have limited resources, you could spend that money building, expanding the product, And for a for-profit company, like that in the non-profit case, and for a for-profit company, like you guys are not generating revenue, so.
So you're trying to get me fired?
No.
The question?
No, how in both cases, like in Khan Academy, like the donors are limited. Like how is the communication with your higher ups? Like how do you justify it?
First of all, you lower the cost of doing the efficacy work. And that, I think Jeremy said that.
Yeah.
And the other is that I think if you can tie it to improving the product, so it's not just for your sales and marketing, but you can actually show that you can make it better. I think that helps.
Another dilemma along the lines you're bringing up is if you set the expectations for the rigor of an efficacy study that one has to do super high, only the best capitalized companies can do one. And then is that the society we want, where only the biggest companies can play in an ESSA-regulated, I'm talking about K-12 now, in an ESSA-regulated world? So I think we want to think, when you look at something like a meta-analysis, it can summarize lots of lower quality studies. And so just thinking, I think it's really important to think about these trade-offs in policy terms, because I think it can have implications.
I mean, our demand for efficacy is coming from our clients. So we've got this sale is riding on your being able to show why this product is better than a competitor product that this company is also considering. Or this sale to a school district is riding on your ability to produce an ESSA effectiveness study that qualifies the school to purchase software using a particular pot of money that's been set aside by the U.S. government, and that has a little checkbox that says only can be used to purchase software that has this evidence behind it. So there is a business case for efficacy, but it is, it's not the same thing as being able to really push for sales and marketing. We're a very small team, you're a very small team. So there's a case for it, but it's we're still a very small part of a much larger organization.
Yeah, from the nonprofit side, kind of just to sum up what everyone has said, we keep our costs low. We do all of our stuff in-house for now. And we do it to hold ourselves accountable, and also because our donors want it. They want to know. They ask us. They're like, we're donating a lot of money. We want to make sure that it's actually making a difference. And so from that perspective, it's worth it.
And making a difference not just on average, but for particular
Specific,
groups.
yeah. All they care about is subgroups.
Anita?
So the question of inequities in educational outcomes has been brought up in a couple of questions from audience members, and it's been alluded to tangentially in some of the talks. I would like to understand, maybe particularly from the nonprofits, in terms of the sort of tier 4 SR model, like how is online learning or edtech expected to impact inequities in educational outcomes?
That's a good question. So I can't say how I don't know exactly how it's expected. I think I'm assuming that people expect that ed tech is going to, help everyone increase, at least at Khan Academy, what we found in our studies when we disaggregate by subgroups. Certainly we see an achievement gap when students start off. So the study that we have a SAT prep on ours, and we partner with the College Board to see how growth from PSAT to SAT, how that growth is impacted by use of Khan Academy. And we certainly see those achievement gaps to begin with. But what we're encouraged by is that the rate of growth across all subgroups is similar. So we're not narrowing achievement gaps, unfortunately, but at least everyone's rising at the same rate. So we're encouraged by that. We'd love to narrow the gaps, but we haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, so I'd like to share something from one of the 4 studies that speaks to this. And so one of the things you can get into, it was actually alluded to in one of the philosophy books that was up there, the Weapons of Math Destruction, Technology as an Accelerator of Inequities. what if you have a product that has very personalized paths, and the net effect is that smart kids go way faster, and the product tells the kids who are not doing so well to slow way down. And you give them a state test, what do you expect to see? Well, you can very easily see bigger achievement gaps because you've slowed down the ones who are behind and you've sped up the ones who are ahead. And so we had a product that we did some research with. I thought it was a very nice product, but we saw that it had a zero net effect, but it simultaneously had the highest performing schools were using this product and the lowest performing schools were using this product. So it wasn't that the effect was zero everywhere, is that it was beneficial, more beneficial to schools that were already ahead. So you can do that both at the student level and the school level. Is a product an accelerator for schools that have more capacity? Is it an accelerator for kids who are already coming in with higher prior achievement or prior knowledge? And those are things I think very basically we need to look at is if we want to close gaps, where does that happen in an adaptive product?
And I think another example we looked at a STEM product where it worked well for everybody except English learners in science. And this was then not something that was published or, but it went into how do we fix this? And, I didn't recommend Rosetta Stone at that time, but maybe.
I want to share a more positive story too, because I felt like that was super negative. The online homework study we showed had a gap closing effect, where kids who were starting out weaker, everyone benefited, but the kids who started out weaker seemed to get more acceleration in their scores by having the feedback and having the change in classroom structures in that online homework study. So it's not like you always get, but you have to worry about it. You have to worry about who you're helping and who you're not.
My comment is related to measurement. From my perspective, I would put this in a framework of validity. And from that perspective, then I would ask, and all those limitations that I appreciated that you put it there for ESSAA, I would say one of the validity requirements, 101, is that you have measurement invariance. So you need to make sure that your measurement or your teaching instrument is producing similar results across subgroups. And if not, then you as a designer need to do something about that. That's one comment. The second comment to Jeremy's example, that's a good example of what's called the Simpson paradox. So it happens quite often actually in empirical studies with, where people are looking for causal or influences like in a causal relationship, that you find that it's a zero effect overall, but then it's a differentiated effect in different variables. It happens actually in some older SAT efficacy studies, so it was discovered as well. So Howard Weiner was a statistician who has been working on that. I just think that bringing this conversation within the measurement conversation could help. Not having necessarily all the results or solving all the problems, but I think that perspective, a statistical perspective, could help. Thanks.
One quick one to the measurement thing. One of the studies I showed there, the one that had 3 things in it, that one used 2 outcome measures. One was highly related to the Texas state test, and one was highly related to NAEP. And it showed no effect on one and an effect on the other. And it's an example, a very clear example, of if you choose the wrong measure, you can easily get a null effect because your measure is not sensitive to the instructional change. In this case, the instructional change was to increase conceptual understanding, and the Texas state measure was a terrible measure of that. So anyway, if you're looking for a clear example of where measuring the wrong thing can give you a null result, even though the product is doing something, and that's another dimension of getting the measurement right is really hard.
Yeah, thanks for all the talks. I have a question for everyone, but particularly for Jeremy and Dennis. I was kind of surprised by how difficult it was to implement something that seemed to be effective and get buy-in from districts and whatever. Because I feel like that's sort of the whole point of this, right? I mean, it's hard enough just doing the study, but then getting the result and actually trying to implement it should be the whole point. Can you talk about situations where the implementation was successful and what was different about it and why that tended to be better implemented?
One thing about a randomized control trial is you're always starting with novices. That is, you have to be working with somebody who's never used the product, because otherwise otherwise you have a quasi-experiment. So I think that's sort of one piece of an answer.
Another kind of thing, I'll give you a little more detail on what I think happened somewhat in the Maine versus North Carolina thing. Schooling is organized very differently in different parts of the U.S. In the state of Maine, teachers have incredible local autonomy to choose what they want to do. Many other places, you have central districts making all these decisions and putting up very specific pacing guides. And so sometimes, even though you have a great result, if the characteristic of how a district adopts something or how a teacher adopts something changes across the country, you're going to run into some troubles because the decisions are being made in a different way. So a little bit, we're not talking, this implementation is adoption. That's one of the tricks about adoption, is adoption decisions are not made in uniform ways in the U.S.
Our group talked about how when you do trial runs in a research lab setting, and maybe in your wildest dreams you might have 800 to 1,000 students, but I'm on the bond committee. I'm representing $1.3 billion of bond facilities to build 3 new schools. I'm on 2 different school districts. So I've worked with probably about 5 superintendents over the last 10 years. And I really love what the person said. Doesn't care. These people don't care about your studies, unfortunately. What they care about is, how do I get 15,000, 20,000 students to be able to learn something? And that's much more of a political effort and a mobilization, community building kind of effort, where you have thousands of teachers for these 20,000 students. So where I'm getting to is actually the gap. I care a lot about the achievement gap. And Sesame Street was the first time this country tried to address it. So back in the 50s and the 60s, they put on Sesame Street to broadcast to every home. And what they found is all boats rose. Mm-hmm. Exactly what you're finding with the $1 million, $10 million, same outcome. So if we know this, my question is, what elements of products or solutions that you've seen are critical for closing that gap? And I empirically have an opinion. And my opinion is synchronous mentoring, coaching, whether it's the D student that, mentor, peer-to-peer mentors the F student. The D student feels great because they're confident, right? Or Khan Academy having live teachers online of some sort. And so what do you see is effective? And I think it's people. I think it's labor.
I think this is a great place to look at some of the, that's why I like some of these meta-analyses, is you can see across lots of studies what's happening. So in that LinkedIn article, there is a meta-analysis of coaching, and so you can look at that. There's some really nice work on tutoring. There's one on math. I'm a math guy, so math products, and it does point to tutoring as one of the elements that human tutoring that's often part. So I think one of the reasons to look at these is for broad characteristics of things that, when they're tried in lots of different places with lots of different products supporting it, you're still seeing the same pattern of results. And so it's important just for us to know what those are.
Okay, we have time for one more question. You're the lucky winner there with the microphone.
Made it. Woohoo! So, first of all, thank you so much. I'm learning a ton, and this is highly effective. I'm curious. When we talk about learner efficacy, right? We all recognize that in the land of education, everybody starts at different places, right? And our objective is to advance people. It seems to me, and I could be wrong, correct me if that's the case, that when we are evaluating students, we use the standard measure and look at where do people fall in the curve, as opposed to, so instead of using an absolute efficacy measure, what if we used a derivative, a growth rate measure, and looked at, you know, what was the percentage of advancement in the population, and if someone was highly competent, did they advance by 10% more across the board? Would love your thoughts on that.
First thought is, yeah, that's a great idea.
I mean, in a sense, when you have a covariate from a prior score, you're doing that you're really controlling for a prior score. The SimCalc study up there was framed in terms of growth rates. So best if you're doing a growth rate study to actually have a curve with multiple points on it, and that's even more expensive to do. But you know, I think we all agree with you, and all the well-designed studies are going to not really look on an absolute scale, but look for controlling for prior knowledge or prior achievement.
Mm-hmm. Right, so we have some studies where we've had state assessment data as well as data from NWEA's MAP assessment, and so with the MAP assessment we're looking at the growth data because we're able to do that with that particular assessment, and so we looked at rates of growth there, and then we would look at the state assessment to see like the probability of meeting standards, and so when we can, for us it's, you know, opportunistic when we can get access to that data, when a district is willing to share that with us, we certainly would prefer to look at growth data when possible, but always will control for year prior achievement data. Mm-hmm.
Certainly with English language students, that's one of the big things we would look at, right? So you've got kids coming in at different levels of English, and we look at the slope of the change with the intervention versus the non-intervention group so that we can see whether essentially those kids are closing the gap by the end of the school year. So I think that's similar to what you're asking. But in that case, it's because we had pre-test, post-test, and we had at least 2 time points.
By the way, a really cool resource, a nod to Stanford here, Professor Sean Reardon here produced an archive called CEDA, and it normalizes data from all over the United States, and you have grades 3 through 8. And so in that data set, you can look at schools which add more value, grades 3 through 8, and other schools which start out high and their kids stay high, but the kids came in with an advantage. And you can also look at schools where the kids start with very similar achievement, but achievement gaps grow, or where schools start with kids that are ahead and behind and those achievement gaps narrow. And so it's a really cool data set to look at growth in the 3 to 8. That's a pretty long context. So if you're interested in that, I'd go poking around in that data set. And it's open, it's free, super cool.
And to add a layer to that, the Opportunity Atlas has leveraged that data and is looking at that data geographically and looking at like equity issues in various areas, like really cool big data there too.
All right, thanks everybody. We're going to take a 15-minute break, have some more coffee, have some more chocolate if it's still out there, and then we'll come back in here for the final talks.